Douglas Roche, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining the Salt Spring Forum and myself this evening.
Thank you, Michael, for the invitation. I appreciate it.
We've we've known each other for a while, Doug, and I have to say that I prepared for this call with some concern for your health, and not because of your age, because you're still a young man in many respects, but because of your location and because of the time that we're in. You're actually in Edmonton this evening, which is a pretty bad place to be during this COVID-19 pandemic. How are you doing, my friend?
Well, I'm fine. I'm very grateful. I have my health. I'm 91 and able to function. I've just published a book we're going to talk about. So I'm grateful for my physical and my mental health. And it's true that we're living in a very dangerous period now with the COVID, and it's raging in various parts of the world as we speak. And it's very bad in Edmonton too. But I stay by myself pretty well most of the time.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned your age. You're 91. You've seen the arc of history. I imagine you remember the Second World War. You would have been a teenager then. The bombing of Hiroshima. I mean, your connection and your contribution to the peace movement would have started with being a witness to the carnage of the early 1940s.
I was 16 years old when World War II ended, and I remember vividly that August morning in 1945, sitting at the kitchen table with my parents when the announcer came on CBC News and said a new and unheard of powerful weapon had just been detonated in Japan, and we thought that was going to lead quickly to the end of the war. Well, it did, and but that did not make me involved in the peace movement at that time. It took several years, and it was actually when I was still a young member of Parliament in the early 1970s when I went to Hiroshima for the first time. I'd been to Hiroshima many times over the years, but that first time it overwhelmed me when I saw the museums and talked to the hibakusha, the survivors, and saw the unbelievable carnage, the damage that human beings had inflicted on others. And that was certainly a turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm. And just so our viewers know, you were a progressive conservative member of Parliament from Edmonton.
I was a Stanfield conservative. Remember Bob Stanfield, the greatest prime minister Canada never had? He was a progressive conservative leader, and he asked me to run in Edmonton, Strathcona in the 1972 election. And I did, and I stayed in Parliament for 12 years. I ran 4 elections, and I was never defeated. But I left in 1984 because I wanted to concentrate my life in issues of disarmament and development. When you're a member of Parliament, you've got to be everything to everybody. Mm-hmm. And I just felt that I wanted to concentrate my energies in the field that I was then delving into. So that was the year Brian Mulroney was elected Prime Minister and Joe Clark as the Foreign Minister, and they appointed me Ambassador for Disarmament at the United Nations. And so I went down to the UN, and I spent a lot of time there, of course, all through my life. But in that period, I was ambassador for 4 or 5 years. And that also deepened my understanding of the human interconnections that are needed in order to build a peace agenda.
So you went from being a Red Tory member of Parliament to being ambassador for disarmament during the last number of years of the Cold War. I mean, you were right in the crucible of global politics, dealing with disarmament issues at that time.
in 1988, I was elected chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee. It's called the First Committee. And that was an honor to begin with, but also was a tremendous learning experience for me, because to prepare for my chairmanship, I went around the world to all the capitals of the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council. And that gave me deep insights, and I formed some friendships, to the extent that you can in diplomacy. I formed some friendships, and it was a good atmosphere to work in, because in 1988, the Cold War, while it had not ended, you could see it was turning. Gorbachev and Reagan had issued their now famous statement that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. And that led to the Geneva Agreements and the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty banning a whole class of nuclear weapons. So that was a big step forward. And then, of course, in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and I've been to Berlin many times, and I even have in my study here, where I now am, a piece of the Berlin Wall that I have willed to one of my grandchildren, so as a piece of history. So I did have the good fortune to represent Canada at a turning point in history. And maybe we might talk about this a bit later, but I'll just say quickly now that I have always been proud to represent Canada, and Canada was a player. You'll notice that I say was a player in those years, and it helped. All these experiences continued to form me, and later on, then when I went to the Senate in the late 1990s, and was able to draw on the experiences that I'd had as a member of Parliament and as an ambassador, to examine at that time, as happened after 9/11, the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. And I remember one day getting up in the Senate, and I said in the question period, and I said to the leader of the government, I said, I put this in form of a question: would you, leader, kindly convey to the Prime Minister of Canada, Jean Chrétien, the deep gratitude felt in the Senate today that he kept Canada out of the Iraq war? And there was a scattering of applause, but not everybody. And then a Conservative got up a couple of minutes later and said, well, the leader, when you speak to the Prime Minister, would you ensure that Senator Roche's statement was not unanimous in the Senate? So, there's discord everywhere, and I've had my share of it. As we say, Michael, in politics, I have the scars to prove the battles that I've been in.
And I think it's worth knowing for the viewers that when you were appointed to the Senate, you chose to sit as an independent, even though you had been a progressive conservative member of Parliament.
Prime Minister Chrétien, when he called me to ask me to be the Senate, he said, well, we have to decide where you're going to sit. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, you'd like to sit as a Liberal? I said, well, Prime Minister, if I sat as a Liberal, everybody in Canada would say Doug Roche sold out so that you'd make an appointment. You'd appoint me. I don't think that's a good idea, sir. He said, oh, yeah, no, good. He said, well, you want to sit as a Conservative? And I said, well, sir, I lived under the Tory whip for 12 years, and I don't want to go back under the Tory whip. He said, oh, yeah, old Doug. He said, well, it doesn't leave very much. It just leaves an independent. I said, well, Prime Minister, will you let me serve as an independent? He said, Doug, I think in your case I will. I said, okay, sir, I'll take the job. It was all done in 30 seconds. So I had a great time in the Senate. I loved being in the Senate, and I'm vigorously opposed. You'll see my selfish reasons here. I'm vigorously opposed to the law that says that senator has to retire at age 75. It's probably a good law, all things considered. But I'm not in favor of it for myself. But nonetheless, the day came when I had to leave.
I mean, it's pretty obvious we've missed 16 years of phenomenal service in the Senate by Doug Roche as a result of that law.
Well, I've carried on. I mean, I've built, my work has brought me into several fields. For many years, I led the Middle Powers Initiative, which was a consortium of 8 non-governmental organizations deeply involved in nuclear disarmament. And we were a forerunner. I'd like to say this, humbly, but accurately. We were a forerunner of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and because we went around the world and holding conferences and seminars, consultations with governments, middle power governments, and getting them to focus more clearly on nuclear disarmament. And I'm happy that the government of Canada sponsored one of our conferences in the Pearson building, and the foreign minister of the day, Peter MacKay, gave a speech, the opening speech to the conference, and it was then about the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that we were focusing on. And so those experiences that I've had have enabled me to I don't know whether maybe say stepping back a bit from the fray, the daily fray, and enabled me to keep writing. And so this summer I got the idea that I would like to write about the possible effects of a Joe Biden presidency, and that's what drew me into the current book.
Yes, and the book is entitled Recovery.
The book is entitled Recovery: Peace Prospects in the Biden Era, and I wrote the book in the summer. I had met Joe Biden in 2001, in December the 1st, 2001, in Philadelphia, when I was a speaker at a conference on the nuclear disarmament at the time of missile defense period. And Biden was the speaker at the dinner, which opened the conference. And so we met, and he greeted me as a fellow senator. And, we had a nice exchange and so on. And he made a speech, and I made a speech the next day. Life went on. I never saw him again. But I always had him in mind. And so I was watching him prepare for the nomination, the Democratic nomination this summer. And a friend of mine, Jonathan Graff, who runs Global Security Institute, that sponsored the conference, sent me a photo that was taken on that occasion of Biden and myself, and that triggered a lot of memories. And so this summer I buckled down and started to research Biden's positions, and on the 4 pillars of the peace agenda: the economic and social development, arms control and disarmament, climate and environment, and advancing human rights. And I liked what I saw when I was researching it, and I began to write, and I felt my own spirits rising. So far, in this few minutes that you and I have been talking, the word Trump has not arisen, and I hope it won't arise again. But that, of course, has been in my mind, and it's so much in the current dialogue and current discourse that all through the summer, could I beat Trump? I didn't tell anyone I was writing the book. I didn't even tell my children. I told nobody, because I did not want to engage in any conversations with anybody defending my position on writing a book when I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And then the conversation would turn to, well, what are you going to do if Trump wins? And so I just did not want to have that kind of conversation. And I refused to consider the possibility that Biden might lose. And so I wrote the book on the assumption that he would win, and thus what his positions would be on the 4 main elements of the peace agenda, which I've just mentioned. And that's how I was able to get the book done. And I'm glad now I did. I had to make a decision after the election on November 3rd, when I saw the following few days when Trump refused to concede, about whether I would allow this book to be published. I wanted it instantly. That's why I self-published it and had distributing through Amazon. I did this deliberately because I wanted the book out, because I wanted people's attention focused now on what Biden can do as president, and his whole multilateral outreach, which we might talk about in a minute. And so I made the decision after a few days. I said, if I delay this book, I will be contributing to this madness around us when everybody's focusing on Trump. I said, I want to change the focus. I want to get people to thinking about Biden. What is Biden going to do? What about this $2 trillion plan that he has for the climate and the environment and the jobs? I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, it's equal in stature to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s. It's certainly equal to the Marshall Plan, in which the United States went into Europe after World War II to restore the economies of the Western countries. And so we need to focus on what Joe Biden as president can do and what he intends to do. And he started already on the climate. He's appointed a terrific team that we've never seen such experienced people. I mean, John Kerry. I mean, these people are. They say it's a cliche, hit the deck running or something. But these people are all prepared to govern in a positive and constructive way. Will they make mistakes? Sure. Are there things they should do that they won't do? Undoubtedly. But the very fact that Biden is there with his commitment to multilateralism, lifting the countries that together in ways that Biden's predecessor denigrated, that itself is a sign of hope.
In the book, and I strongly recommend that everyone read your book. It is inspiring. It's also very practical. It identifies things that we can do to help Joe Biden and his administration deal with some of these big challenges, including quite specifically and forcefully what Canada as a country can do to help with this agenda. So let's talk about climate change, right? You're in Edmonton, and Canada is a climate change laggard in large part because of the Alberta oil sands and the perception in this country that the oil industry is too important for us to make difficult decisions. Do you think that with the Biden administration pushing the climate agenda really hard, spending the $2 trillion, that the Canadian government will be forced to change its position in terms of supporting the oil sands and actually make the tough decision to move rapidly to a post-oil economy?
I am not a total supporter of everything Justin Trudeau does, and that might become apparent as we proceed in this conversation. But at this point, I would like to say that I think that Trudeau and the government around him is stepping up to the plate on the environment and moving the carbon tax sequentially up to $170 is a significant, quite a significant step. And Trudeau has, for the last few years, been saying, well, we have to have the economy and the environment and the economy, they go together and so on. Well, when the crunch comes in the oil industry, I wish that the oil industry in Alberta or I wish the people of Alberta had demanded that the prescription put out by Peter Lougheed in the 1970s, that Alberta diversify its economy and start moving. In those days, renewable energy seemed like a dream in the sky or something. But Lougheed had prescience and foresight, and he knew that it was a trap for Alberta to be overly dependent on oil, because oil, after all, whatever about the environment, oil is a finite resource. It is going to be exhausted at some point. Well, in intervening years, we've now understood what the effects of the petroleum industry have been on the gas emissions and climate change. So the climate change issue, which used to be regarded as sort of a coming emergency or something we have to watch out for in the future, that is already here. In my book, I talk about the triple emergency that Biden is facing: climate change, nuclear weapons, and the coronavirus. We'll talk about in a minute. But on the climate, the government of Canada it's been late coming to this game. It did sign up in Paris, but the Paris agreements were somewhat adjustable, put it that way. And I think that Trudeau now is showing signs. At least I'm perceiving in Justin Trudeau a recognition that Canada has got to take a leading role in climate. And now that Biden is in office, it'll be a lot easier for Canada to do this because it'll be in harmony with Biden's policies.
And do you see a connection between the outcome of the U.S. election and Trudeau's subsequent decision to make this big announcement on the carbon tax?
I think that, yes, I do see a connection. And I think that the affinity between the United States and Canada, which always had sort of variations, it's like an orchestra, little high notes and low notes. Canada, whether it's led by Trudeau or anybody else, but since Trudeau's in power, let's talk about him. I do think that Trudeau is recognizing that he has a new moment to recover Canada's stature in multilateral affairs. Canada was bruised in the defeat, twice in a row. 10 years ago it was defeated, and then June it was defeated in the election for a seat on the Security Council. And that has awakened, a lot of people were awake, but it's activated the government to recognize that it's got to play a role. And I saw that almost immediately in Trudeau's work in the co-chairing with Jamaica, a special conference, a sort of a continuing conference of about 60 countries working to alleviate the distress, the terrible distress of the vulnerable developing countries as a result of the coronavirus. I mean, the people who are suffering the most in life generally are the ones who are hit hardest by the coronavirus, and thus need the financial mechanisms of the world, which rotate around the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, need to be upgraded and made more sensitive to the needs of developing countries. And so 6 streams of activity, and Justin Trudeau co-chaired this conference, and it kept on. And it's a little known that Canada did give it is the total amount of the money that Canada devoted to coronavirus, helping people with coronavirus outside of Canada, is approaching $1 billion, and which is not inconsiderable. I'm critical, and I will be in a minute or two, but I want to say at this point, with respect to Trudeau and the climate and the UN and the multilateralism generally, that now that Biden is there, Canada can revert, so to speak, to its traditional role of expressing itself internationally through the United Nations. The United Nations, the whole field of agencies of the United Nations, and they can do this now in a obviously much better atmosphere that Biden brings to this work than his predecessor did.
And also on climate change and energy, the old argument that we have to move together with the United States because our economies are so closely joined together, that argument, I mean, that disappears when the United States is moving faster than Canada. We then need to catch up with them on climate change because of the economic linkages. So that moment now appears where the U.S. is going to move fast and hard on climate, and to keep the Canadian economy competitive, all of a sudden we need to get serious about climate change also.
Well, I totally agree, and I think that this is the direction that Justin Trudeau has sensed, and that he's moving the government in that way. I wouldn't want to go too far in my effusive admiration for Justin Trudeau. I mean, I want to give him credit. I knew his father very well. I mean, I was in Parliament with Pierre Trudeau, and I think that Pierre Trudeau was a much stronger person, and I don't want to be against Justin Trudeau, but there are some things about him, and particularly in the field of nuclear weapons, that leave a lot to be desired. But for the moment, I want to make it clear to those who are seeing this program that I am in favor of Trudeau's reaching out to help in the COVAX situation, that is the assembly of teams of people and money for distribution of the vaccine to the most vulnerable people in the world. He's on board that. He's on board the climate change, and so this is a good step forward for him.
Well, your praise is worth more because you're also willing to criticize him on other issues.
Well, I will, because I've said that there were 3 emergencies in the world that Joe Biden is facing. Comes into office and faces the climate, nuclear weapons, and the coronavirus. Let's talk for a moment about nuclear weapons. There are still some 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world, and they are a constant threat to peace. As a matter of fact, you cannot have peace in the world while there are still nuclear weapons. They are insidious. They are the ultimate evil, and they have to be recognized as the potential Armageddon that they pose, rather than forgotten about. So the Cold War ended, so the nuclear weapons problem went away. It did not go away. The modernization of nuclear weapons that is taking place by all the possessors of nuclear weapons, I should say 9 countries, but particularly the United States and Russia, which together hold about 93 or 94% of the 14,000 nuclear weapons. And the modernization programs that are going ahead with them are a constant threat to break down negotiations, the Trump administration leaving existing treaties. All that has heightened the danger in the world. And thus, as a result of the increasing danger posed by nuclear weapons, and I can call many authorities to support what I've just said, the increasing danger. As a result of that, the humanitarian movement sprung up about 4 or 5 years ago, led by some progressive governments, Austria, Mexico, Sweden, and so on, and advanced civil society groups. It wasn't only the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, but several other groups also. So together, they advanced this humanitarian movement through 3 conferences, which led to a resolution in the United Nations which authorized negotiations for a new treaty. That new treaty is called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It came into existence in 2017 when 122 states, that's to say about 2/3 of all the countries in the world, voted in favor of it. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council not only did they vote against it, but they boycotted the negotiations. And with them, the United States, Britain, and France carried the NATO countries. Ergo, Canada is involved in this what I would call shameful exercise now of keeping itself away from the involvement and even thorough discussion. I mean, the references in the government, in the Parliament of Canada, have been superficial on nuclear weapons, and came about. The only debate they had came about as a result of an opposition day motion by the New Democratic Party. And Michael, the nuclear disarmament is not a partisan issue. It's not a left issue or a right issue. It's a smart and dumb issue. It's an issue, but are we going to allow ourselves to live in a world in which there's so much danger posed as a result of the continuing pileup of nuclear weapons and the lack of negotiations to eliminate them. And the famous Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2000 came to an agreement in which they said that we're all going to make an unequivocal undertaking, the exact words, unequivocal undertaking, to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. But right after that conference in the year 2000, the Bush government was elected. George W. Bush, who was the forerunner of Trump in having the United States leave treaties. And so the humanitarian movement in later years it sprung up. Now we have this treaty. It's coming into effect. The treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons is entering into force. That's a diplomatic term. Entering into force on January 22nd, 2021. That is to say, in 12 months' time. And the board 50 countries haven't ratified it. And what is Canada going to do? Canada is sitting on the sidelines because Canada is a member of NATO. What did NATO do? NATO issued a statement. The NATO Atlantic Council issued a statement a few days ago saying, this is a terrible treaty. We're not going to have this treaty because it interferes with our discussions, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the discussions that have taken place have been going on for 50 or 60 years, and we still have nuclear weapons. So we need to have the possession of nuclear weapons prohibited, and that's what the treaty does. It delegitimizes the military doctrine of nuclear deterrence. It outlaws nuclear weapons. Now, Michael, if we're going to have a treaty that outlaws chemical weapons and a treaty that outlaws biological weapons, by what stretch of the imagination or rationale can you come to not going to outlaw nuclear weapons? But no, we're not going to outlaw because they are instruments of power. They have become the currency of power, and that's why some countries are floating on the sidelines are still trying to get into the nuclear club. North Korea and Iran and maybe Saudi Arabia if the Iran thing continues to fall apart. So Canada has an obligation to put the good of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which calls for comprehensive negotiations for the elimination of nuclear weapons. It says this specifically in Article 6. It enjoins the states to pursue negotiations for the elimination of nuclear weapons. That Article 6 has been reinforced by the International Court of Justice, the highest legal authority in the world. And now for NATO to have the effrontery to continue to say, as they did in their statement a few days ago, nuclear weapons are the supreme guarantee of security. Michael, nuclear weapons are the supreme guarantee of insecurity. It's just the reverse. So, and Pierre Trudeau must be turning in his grave when he sees this performance that Canada is trying to put on of sitting on the fence or striding a line, whatever metaphor you want to use, that saying, well, we're all for nuclear disarmament, but we don't like this treaty. Well, they're going to have to change their tune. So the movements in Canada there are, and I'm part of them myself. I pay tribute to the work that they're doing, but they need to be their strength. And why my friends in India say, more power to your elbow, more power to your elbow. Well, our elbow needs to be strengthened in Canada as we go forward on this issue.
Now, NATO states are very worried about Donald Trump and the possibility that he might have pulled the United States out of NATO. I mentioned Trump, I'm sorry. But Joe Biden coming in as president will be a much more reliable partner with regards to European security. And I could imagine that within that more reliable relationship, that there would be leeway for a country like Canada to ratify the new nuclear weapons treaty. We were, after all, a member, a partner in the Manhattan Project, but chose not to acquire nuclear weapons ourselves. We would be the ideal first member of NATO to join this new treaty. So I'm absolutely with you on this. But I want to come to a section of your book when you're talking about Biden and and nuclear disarmament. And you're very emphatic that Biden's hands will be tied to a significant degree by the incredible political power of the arms industry in the United States, and so his ability to get things done. Even if the Democrats win the 2 Senate seats in Georgia next month, they still won't have 2/3 of the Senate, which is what they require to get the advice and consent of the Senate for the ratification of a treaty. So Biden might not be able to get as much done on nuclear weapons as he can on climate change. Or am I being unnecessarily pessimistic here?
Well, there's a lot of things going on in your comment. In brief, I agree that Biden will be able to advance the agenda for peace and human security through the climate route, not the nuclear disarmament route, certainly in the open stages. The world is ready and crying out for more vigorous work in protection of the climate, because the evidence is now becoming quite clear. The damage to the planet, the permanent damage to the planet. So yes, Biden has made a deep commitment there. I do not expect Biden to take on the military-industrial complex. This is a deep-seated, formidable force of the industry and industrialists, and people who have made a lot of money off of fomenting the idea, the concept that we have to have an enemy. We have to, in the Cold War, we had to have an enemy, so the Soviet Union. So we had to build up all the arms against the Soviet Union. Well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, then they had to find another enemy. And of course, they were greatly helped in this by the 9/11, and then by the Iraq War and so on. So there's always been a reason to build up armaments. And now, of course, China looming larger on the international scene, posing a threat to the domination of the world that the United States has had, through the force of its economy and its political strength. So Biden will not take on the military conflict. Barack Obama, I've just been reading his book. It's a very fascinating book, and he describes he was almost embarrassed to get the Nobel Peace Prize for his speech in Prague in 2009, pointing to a nuclear weapons-free world, because he ran up against this big barrier in his own administration, that wouldn't back him on concrete steps for nuclear disarmament. And so, this is what Biden is inheriting. Biden did say, he gave a speech in January of 2017, in his last days as vice president, in which he pointed to a nuclear weapons-free world and said that we have to keep advancing this agenda. And then later on, and a few more years passed, and he started his campaign for the Democratic nomination, and his papers and his speeches and his articles have said quite clearly that he wants to take steps that lower the danger level and do this through diplomacy. And so I think that, like, the START Troop Treaty now, which is up for renewal, as we all know, in February, it will expire in February if it's not renewed. And Biden has said he will renew it, so he's already, and he will get the United States back into the Iran agreement. And so he is recognizing that the role of the United States is all the damage that has been done in the last few years notwithstanding. The role of the United States is very powerful, very strong in advancing the world agenda, and the Germans and the French, who have, in my view, good leadership now in the sense of Macron and Merkel, they are looking to the United States for renew leadership multilaterally, and that the multilateral agenda has never made a minute, but certainly has a lowering the pressure of nuclear disarmament, lowering the pressure of the continuation of the nuclear arms race, and it's siphoning up too much money, and among other things. Now that the money is needed to fight the coronavirus, we haven't yet talked about the third emergency, what the coronavirus is doing to politics and human life generally. But in short, it's going to require a lot of money to strengthen and shore up the health systems around the world, particularly in the developing countries. So this, coming back to Biden recognizes, I think, that he's got formidable adversaries, and some of whom will be in his own party, because the United States defense budget, $740 billion a year, more than the next 15 countries combined, is kept high because there's a consortium of Democrats and Republicans on the Armed Services Committee that are themselves the recipients of huge amounts of money from the military-industrial complex. Michael, the system down there is so corrupt, you can't believe it. It's so corrupt. But that's what it is. And that's what Biden has to face. So in the strength of that, I think that he will move carefully, but even his openness to multilateralism will itself be a contributing factor to the renewal of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is going to be examined next year.
When I was reading the section of your book when you're talking about the U.S. military budget and the need to reduce it slightly and to use that money saved to invest in the sustainable development goals and to addressing climate change and to rebuilding after COVID-19, I couldn't help but think of the domestic parallel in the United States, which is the push to reduce police budgets and to take the money saved and to invest them into mental health supports and into housing and other social justice initiatives as a way of dealing with the real problems by taking just a small percentage of the money away from the people who carry guns. Do you see a parallel here between that debate domestically and the international issue as you described it?
I definitely do. And of course, they're running scared in the U.S. now. But I'd like to point out on this question of transferring money from military to health needs or what I call human security agenda, that includes a range of issues around this sustainable development goals, 17 goals. We haven't got time to go down all 17 goals that the United Nations has to improve the lot of the developing countries in the period between 2015 and 2030. Sometimes it's called the 2030 Agenda. In my book, I come out strongly for a 10% decrease. But I'm hardly the first, and I certainly did not invent the idea that we get better security by spending money on development issues that we do on military. That was brilliantly analyzed in the 1980s by the Swedish diplomat Inga Thorsson, whose international commission led to an international conference in 1989 on the relationship between disarmament and development. And there, all the experts, they showed conclusively that what Thorsson called a dynamic triangular relationship. That is to say, the more you advance money into development and reduce money on military spending, the greater security develops. So you have more security, if that's what you're looking for, not just an excuse to show up the military-industrial complex. But if you want human security, you take money from the arms militarism and put it into development. So in my book, I did call for a 10% decrease. The world is spending, the last figure is available, over $1.9 trillion a year on arms. And that's the highest it's ever been. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has been calling for a kind of a compact to get $2 to $3 billion extra, as a result of coronavirus. And the money that's needed for the Sustainable Development Goals has been something that it's up to trillions. And so the money. There's a lot of things that are going on in the campaigns for divestment, getting big corporations, that are involved in manufacturing of arms, one way or another, to reduce the investment in those companies. The $1 trillion, $1.9 trillion, the annual amount of money spent on arms. If they do 10% of that, it would be $190 billion. That would be a lot of money for development purposes, particularly at the time of the coronavirus. And so I just refuse to believe that countries could not reduce their military expenditures by 10%. In the case of Canada, Canada's military budget is now around, defense budget is around $22 billion, and it's slated to go by the year 2027 to $32 billion. That's a huge increase, and that increase was announced by the government of Canada in 2017. It was going to be a 70% increase in defense spending. Why? What is the reason for this? And it's because, Donald Trump said, well, everybody has to pay 2% of their GDP on, because he himself was reflecting the military-industrial complex demands on the United States and the United States defense budget. So I think that I'm certainly not alone in this call. There are, to give them their due credit, some persons in the Congress, Ed Markey, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who was just re-elected. Democrat in Massachusetts always gets elected, but he had a primary race against Joe Kennedy, the scion of the Kennedy clan. And he had a hard time, and he was campaigning, in his campaign was the point to take 10% of the U.S. defense budget into health. So I'm not alone in this, but I did emphasize it in my book, and I'm holding to it now. And I do believe that the circumstances of the coronavirus now demanding so much money that the government's going to be looking, where can they find some money? Well, I can tell you where they can find some money. They can find some money by reducing, certainly, not canceling, reducing the 88 fighter jets and 15 warships that are on the books to be built over the next 2 decades in Canada. And I think that certainly Canada should have a proper defense. I mean, I'm for that. I'm for. We were talking about NATO a few minutes ago. I am not advocating Canada leave NATO, but I do think that NATO has made big mistakes and has got itself sucked into this vortex of ever increasing expenditures, and that NATO should calm itself down and put itself at the service of the United Nations. So that would be a better use of NATO, in my view, and it'd be pretty hard in the current milieu and distrust that had now for the past 4 or 5 years to get something concrete like that done. But again, Michael, the introduction of Joe Biden to the field now does give a different coloration on how nations can work together. And working together, one of the priorities that I would have anyway would be reduced military expenditures in order to increase expenditures on health, education, and all the components of Sustainable Development Goals to make a saner and a safer world.
And just to be clear, some of this spending would be directed internationally in the form of development assistance, because COVID-19 is setting back many of the poorer countries by a decade or more in terms of achieving those goals. So the the need for financial and other assistance has only increased as a result of this pandemic.
The Bill Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, is pretty well respected in the health field, and they've done a tremendous amount in the health field. And they did an extensive examination of the effect of the coronavirus on developing countries. And in their latest report, they said very, very clearly, they said the advances we have made in the past 25 years in development have been erased in the past 25 weeks as a result of the coronavirus. That's how serious it is. Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, has several times now called for, calling for a global ceasefire. He said, there is a war we have to prosecute. Yes, it's the war on the coronavirus, the war on the poverty, the war on the suffering. That's the war we need to concentrate on. So, I would want people to, when they think about what my positions are, as I outline in my book, I am not a dreamer in the sense of, maybe everything will be perfect and we all go to church on Sundays. I mean, I'm all for people going to church on Sunday. I don't want to be misunderstood on that. But it is the practical, the combination of pragmatics with vision. And I call Biden in the book a pragmatic idealist. That's what he is. He's an ameliorator, one who sees what needs to be done and tries to put the pieces together. That's what an ameliorator is. And so combining some vision, I'm not denying that I have some vision as a result of my experience of what it takes to have a peaceful world. Combining that with the pragmatics of how to get there. And I've been through the wars, as I said earlier, I got the scars. Politics is a tough business, and not everybody thinks the way I think, or you, Michael. It's tough out there, and so we have to keep proving the case. And when I try to prove the case and say, well, the reason for hope is not some ephemeral thing. Well, I hope it'll be a nice day tomorrow. I can't do anything about it. My hope is based and grounded on what we have already been able to do in the world in building the United Nations system, building the international institutions, which is dozens, too many to mention here now, revolving around finances, trading, politics, and now climate. We are working together. Every human being is better off than my grandfather was. My great-grandfather, who came from Ireland, came on a boat. They had nothing. And, now look at what we have in science and medicine and technology and all the things that are benefiting the people of the world. And so it's not a question of being a Pollyanna, which some people have been unkind enough to say about me at time to time. Some of my political colleagues. It's a recognition that the realists, I put it this way, the realists in the world are the people who recognize you cannot keep the old war machine going without some terrible thing happening. And the idealists are those who think, we keep floating along and the climate will be fine in the end. Well, the climate will not be fine in the end. Nuclear weapons will not be fine in the end. And not to mention the coronavirus. If we don't step up to the plate now, that's what we got to do with pragmatic work. And that's how I see Biden. Biden that way. That's where my hope is. My hope lies in recognizing that which we have been able to do before, we can do again in a revival, in a renewed spirit of cooperation in the world. Is that too much to ask, Michael? I'm challenging in my book that's not too much to ask.
It's also interesting that you do have some very powerful allies. Pope Francis gave you a major award a few years ago. I'm not sure whether I should refer to you as Sir Douglas, but you were knighted by the Holy See. Joe Biden also knows Pope Francis. Joe Biden's also an Irish Catholic kid. do you see that connection in terms of faith and the inspiration of a progressive pope like Francis as playing a role in the way forward here?
A couple of things here. Pope Francis' encyclical on our common home, which Latin title is Laudato Si, and our common home 5 years ago when it came out, was addressed on the climate, and it was addressed to all of humanity, not just Catholic, addressed to all of humanity, and he got a response from all of humanity because he drove the nail home in this about the disparities and those who have wealth, the small minority in the world possessing the great majority of capital and the assets and contributing onto the pollution. And when it was quite graphic and quite dramatic in some of the writing, and so it advanced the social teaching of the church, and I have certainly been influenced by that, and Joe Biden himself says that he has been also. So I think that Pope Francis, his whole outreach, his sense of outreach, to recognize the griefs and anxieties of the people, as well as the joys of hopes. That's language that comes straight out of the Second Vatican Council, and Francis is a pope who is reaching beyond the sacristy. Believe me, he commands some attention, and serious attention in the world today, and the interfaith movements, the Muslims, Hindus, and Jewish communities, I mean, have recognized this. I've been part of meetings with all of these groups, and they do recognize the leadership that he is putting forward. One would wish that some of the political people who are elected to leadership, who the politics, who so-called to lead people, that they would actually lead also. And Francis got a great line in the particular on climate. He says, "Well, why would these people get themselves elected if they're not going to do something?"
And I guess my point is that that Joe Biden is someone who might listen to Pope Francis and might actually turn those words into action. He's going to be the most powerful person in the world come January 20th. And he clearly understands the scale of the climate crisis. He clearly understands the threat of nuclear weapons. He clearly has empathy, concern for every human being, especially those in poverty. So it is a time to be hopeful, isn't it? And I think your decision to start writing a book last summer that was an optimistic agenda for a Biden presidency was inspired, because I read this book and I didn't think about Donald Trump once. I thought about the hope and the opportunity. Any closing words?
Michael, that's music to my ears. You read the book and didn't think about Trump. That was my whole idea. Look, on the 4-part agenda that I write about, economic and social development, climate change, and protection of the environment, arms control and disarmament, nuclear weapons, and the advancement of human rights. Those are the 4 areas that Biden himself has recognized, and in his own writings and his articles in foreign affairs. Who cares if the article is drafted by somebody else? He's putting this out as the Biden champion. And so this is certainly, I'm not here to oversell or level of oversell Joe Biden, but it's because we have gone through such a terrible period of enmity and just a discarding of the norms of civilized discourse internationally the last few years, that we now look upon his successor as somebody who is welcome because he does have an outreach to what I would call a common secure agenda and a respect for the opinions of others. If you respect somebody, Michael, in the politics and diplomacy, you can go a lot farther in building support for policies than if you're showing disdain for them. So it's a moment of hope. It's maybe, I don't know whether it be after Christmas when people see this program, but Christmas is coming, and Christmas is itself a time of hope. And so I'm feeling as we're turning a corner. We're turning a corner, and I'm proud to be part of this process, and it gives me a reason to get out of bed in the morning, Michael.
Well, Doug, I think that's an excellent note on which to end our conversation. I'm so glad you could join me this evening. I'm so glad that other people will be able to see your energy and your commitment and the fact that you actually feel hope for the future. You say in the book that we always have to keep working for a better future, especially when things are bad. Things have been really bad the last 4 years, and in this new book, you actually have charted a course for recovery internationally and domestically, recovery economically, politically, socially. I just can't thank you enough for having the prescience to write a book that is incredibly useful at this particular moment in history. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, and in some important respects, he's very much like you, and that is the highest compliment that I could give Joe Biden. He's a lot like Doug Roche. So thanks again for everything, Doug, and keep safe. I will be thinking of you over the Christmas and New Year's period, and sending all my best wishes to Edmonton.
Thank you, Michael. It's been such an honor to talk to you. I respect your work so much, and I keep learning from you. So you keep up. You keep up the work, and I'll try to follow you, Michael.
I think it's the other way around, but I'm inspired by you as a role model. So thanks again, Doug, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.